Welcome back to VMware View Administration Training. This lesson's all about monitoring View. This time we're going to discuss the event database, where we can store events that occur within our View infrastructure. We'll talk about the System Health Dashboard and the View Administrator Dashboard that'll give us a lot of great information about the current status of different components within the View infrastructure. We'll talk about the different states that desktops can be in, and we'll talk about session status and how to monitor the user's connections. And finally, we'll do some walkthroughs of these different components and what they look like in a live environment. So let's jump in. The event database. Its purpose is to store event information that occurs on the connection servers, the View agents, and the View Administrator console. Within your View Administrator console, there's an events view that allows you to view the events that are stored in this database. It also stores data historically, but this historical data isn't displayed within the View Administrator, even though it is stored in the database. In order to access this information, you must use some sort of database querying tool, which could be native database querying tools or any other programming interface that can run a query against the database. You can also define how far back in time events will appear within the View Administrator. To do this, you define a certain number of days, which will show backwards. There is a limit of 2,000 entries, though, so don't set it too far back. This database can be stored as either Microsoft SQL or an Oracle database. If using SQL Server, you must use the SQL Server authentication mechanism. You cannot use Windows Integrated Authentication. Some versions of SQL do not allow SQL Server authentication by default, so make sure you configure the SQL Server to allow this. When setting up your event database, you can define a prefix that the tables associated with this particular View infrastructure will use, which provides the capability to use this one database for multiple View infrastructures and store all those events within one database. For quick monitoring of your View infrastructure and its health, you can use the System Health Dashboard, which is located in the top left corner of the View Administrator console. This section will display the current number of remote sessions, local sessions, the number of problem desktops, and any errors or warnings that are happening within your infrastructure. It will also display the current number of View components, vSphere components, Active Directory domains, and data stores that are in either an up, a down, an unconfigured, or an unknown state. Each of the numbers displayed in the System Health Dashboard provide a link to more detail. The View Administrator Dashboard is a specific section within the View Administrator console. It provides more detail on the health of the entire View system. This includes components like the Active Directory domain, the data stores, the vCenter servers, and all the different View connection servers. Each of these components will then also provide additional details about that component. Another section of the View Administrator Dashboard provides the current status of all the desktops, summarized in a tree form based on the state of the desktop itself. So all the desktops that have some sort of problems will be collected under one grouping together, and all the desktops that are currently going through the provisioning process will be grouped together as well. Finally, all desktops that are provisioned without any errors will be grouped together. The final section within this dashboard is a listing of all the data stores that are utilized by any desktop pool, and will include capacity information, including warnings that can alert you when a data store is almost full. So now that you know where to go to find the summary information, let's talk in detail about the different states that a desktop can be in. The summary counts are available in the View Administrator Dashboard, while the details available within the desktop inventory. And a desktop can be in only a single state at any one time. But there are three major groupings of states. The first is preparing, where a desktop can be in a provisioning state while it's being created. A VM is in a customizing state while it's going through the quick prep or sysprep process or having ThinApp applications deployed to it. The waiting for agent status tells us that the VM was powered on, but the agent hasn't started up and reported back to the connection server yet. The deleting state identifies that a VM has been marked for deletion. This could be due to an administrative action or as part of the logoff process. A desktop can be put into maintenance mode so that users can't access it. This state can be configured by an administrator, or more often, you'll see it during a recompose or refresh operation. Finally, you'll see VMs in a startup status, which means the agent is talking to the connection server, but the other services may still be starting up, so the desktop isn't fully available yet. The next major grouping of desktop states is the problem desktops. The first of which is the agent disabled, which obviously means that the agent within the VM has been disabled. An agent unreachable means that the connection server cannot talk to the agent for some reason. There are many reasons why this could be, anywhere from a firewall rule to a VM not connecting to the network properly. When a desktop is configured to be refreshed or deleted after first use, but for some reason that desktop didn't go through that process, it may go into a state of already used, which is a sign that you as an administrator need to go in and manually either delete or refresh that desktop. If a desktop shows up with a configuration error, that usually indicates that PC over IP or the RDP protocol have not been enabled within the VM. A provisioning error could mean a lot of different things, including a data store being out of space, sysprep not working for various reasons, or something that may be preventing the virtual machine from powering on. View will put a desktop in an error state if some error occurred that it can't handle or recognize. When a user that's not assigned to a particular desktop connects to it, that desktop will go into an unassigned user connected state. More often than not, this indicates that someone logged in through the vSphere client. If an unassigned user connects to a desktop and then disconnects without logging off, it'll go into an unassigned user disconnected state. And finally, if you simply can't understand what's going on with that desktop, it'll put it into an unknown state. The final grouping of desktop states is the prepared to use section. A provisioned VM is a VM that has been created but got powered off due to the pool power policy. This is a desktop that will be available to be powered on and quickly brought up online without having to reconfigure it. An available desktop is a desktop that's powered on and ready for an immediate connection from a user. The number of desktops in this state within a particular pool is ruled by the number of available desktops that we configured for that pool. Any desktop that currently has a user connected to it with a remote session will show up as connected. And if a user disconnects from their session without logging off, it'll show up as disconnected. And if a user has a desktop checked out for local mode, it'll show up as a checked out desktop. The final type of desktop state that you can find a desktop in is an unentitled desktop. This is a desktop that is assigned to a user, but that user is no longer entitled to that particular desktop or pool. This often happens when a user belongs to a group that is entitled to a persistent desktop. The user's been assigned a desktop within the pool, but they're no longer a member of that group and therefore not entitled to access it. These desktops can be viewed within the desktop inventory or can be viewed using the VDM admin command on a view connection server. Finally, let's talk about the different statuses of a user session. The current view of user sessions can be viewed under the monitoring section of View Administrator. There are two different views of session statuses. The first is remote sessions, which are users that are connected to a desktop centrally located on the vSphere infrastructure. The other type of session is a local session, which are desktops that are checked out using local mode. Now that you know what you can monitor with View, let's actually jump into our demo environment, and I'll show you what it all looks like. And we'll start by setting up the event database. Switching over to View Administrator and looking at the dashboard, you'll see the event database is the one item that is not currently configured. This is the last bit of configuration that we'll have to do for View Administrator. So let's come down here to View Configuration under the View Configuration. And it explicitly will tell us that there is no database defined yet. So we'll click the Edit button, which will enable us to enter the information for our database. I went ahead and created this database out on the vCenter server. There's no special configuration needed for this database, other than making sure that the database supports SQL authentication as well as Windows Integrated Authentication. This is because the username we use for this database connection must be a SQL login. It is not supported to use Windows Authentication for this connection. So let's go ahead and enter our database server, making sure to include the instance name. We are using Microsoft SQL Server. Since we're using an instance database server, our port is dynamically assigned. You can look that up in the SQL Server Configuration Manager on the SQL Server itself. In our case, it's 49233. The database name is ViewEventDB. The username is EventDBService. And we'll enter the password a couple times. Finally, the table prefix enables us to use this one database for multiple view event databases. In larger environments where you have lots of users, there may be a necessity to have multiple view infrastructures. This way we can host them all within a single database. My lab environment won't host more than one view infrastructure, so we can enter just about anything here. I'll use view1 as our prefix. Now with all the settings, we'll click OK to create our event database. Now we have the ability to define our event settings, so let's edit those. Here you can see we can adjust how far back events will show within View Administrator, as well as how long an event will be classified as a new event. We'll go ahead and leave these at default because we have no reason to change them right now. Now that we have our event database created, we can go into the Monitoring section and click on Events, where you'll see that we now have events appearing. We can adjust the time period in which we look at and filter our events. We can also save them and export them as a CSV file. And that's all it takes to set up our event database. It's an easy configuration for a very powerful tool. Moving on, we'll take a look at what it takes to monitor the status of your desktops within View. Let's start here in View Administrator with our System Health Dashboard, which is this area up here in the top left corner. In here, we could see the time and date at which it was updated, the number of remote sessions. When we click on that, we're redirected to the Monitoring Remote Desktop section, where we can see all the desktops that are connected with a remote session. In this case, we have one connection, which is Troy, who's connected to the IT pool, and the rest of the details about his connection. Next is the local sessions. Clicking on this link will take us to the Monitoring Local Sessions section. In here we can see Purchase 5 DT is checked out of the purchaser's DT pool by user Clara, and more details about her connection. We can see a total of 2 problem desktops. Clicking on that will take us to the Inventory Desktop section, specifically into the Problem Desktops view, where we can see our 2 desktops, John IT's desktop and Retail Kiosk 3. Retail Kiosk 3 is in an already used state. The already used status means that this desktop has been used, but for some reason wasn't automatically refreshed. The John IT desktop has an agent unreachable status, which means for some reason the agent on this machine can't be contacted from View Connection Server. More details on how to troubleshoot these types of desktop issues are available in the lesson on troubleshooting View. Back up on our dashboard, we can take a look at the events that are in an error or warning status, which takes us to the Monitoring Event section, which ties into our event database that we just created. Currently, we don't have any issues here. The System Health section gives us information on how many services are up, how many services are down, how many are in an unknown state, and how many are unconfigured. Before we configured our events database, you may have noticed that this particular status showed a value of 1 because we had one item that was not configured, the events database. Clicking on any of these will take us to our dashboard view. Here in our dashboard view, we've got our system health, our desktop status, and our data stores sections. Each one of them has this little icon here which we can use to maximize that one particular section within our View Administrator console. Under System Health, we have all the different components that make up our View infrastructure, and each of which shows the status of up. So everything is good and healthy in this infrastructure. So you can see all the different components. Clicking on each one of these will pop open a window that'll show us more details about that particular component. Including some version numbers for the actual View installs. We'll minimize this back down and take a look at desktop status. In desktop status, we can see a listing of all the different states that a desktop can be in, and how many desktops are in that particular state. Here are the 2 problem desktops that we looked at a little bit ago, and no desktops that are currently in a preparing state. Remember these numbers, and let's go log into a desktop from our client workstation to show how some of these numbers will change. Here in the View client, we'll connect to the ViewCon01 and log in as Alexander. And connect within the administrative pool. Now let's go take a look back at our View console. You can now see that our available value changed from 7 to 6, and connected is now 2 instead of 1. Refreshing again, our preparing desktops, we'll see that there is one now in a startup mode. Clicking on that will take us to our desktops inventory again, with a filter of startup, to show that we have one admin desktop within the administrative pool is now in a startup mode, meaning the VM has been powered on, but View is waiting for the agent to start. If we refresh our dashboard view up here, we'll see that we now have 2 remote sessions. Switching back to our main dashboard, let's restore the size of the desktop status and take a closer look at our data stores. Here we can see the 4 data stores that are available to us within our vCenter server in their current capacity and free space. There is an icon that will display when the capacity of the data store is running very low. Right now everything is healthy here, so we have no need to worry. Now let's take a look at our pools view, where we can see all of our pools, including session information. Looking inside of any one of these pools, we can click on the Inventory section, which will show us information about all of our desktops that are deployed as part of this pool. Clicking on the View Composer Details section will of course give us details about the View Composer desktops that exist within this pool. We can also look at the tasks and events that apply to this particular pool. Now let's take a look at our desktops, where we can see a listing of all the desktops that are currently being managed by our View Connection servers. We can of course filter based on these different values that either contain, start with, or is exactly some value. So let's say we wanted to look at all the desktops that exist on a particular ESX host. We can simply type in ESX02, click the Find button, and we'll only see the desktops that exist on that particular host. We can also take a look at the problem desktops, which we saw earlier. That's how you can take a quick look at the status of your desktops and View infrastructure that's supporting them. Next, let's move on to talking about the session status and how we can monitor what our users are doing within our View infrastructure. So we'll start here in View Administrator, looking at the Users and Groups section. Here you can see all the different users and groups that have been entitled to a desktop, how many entitlements they have, and how many remote and local sessions within each of those groups. Looking specifically at a group, we can take a look at some general information, specific entitlements, and what sessions have been created for that particular group, both remote and local sessions. Going back to the main Users and Groups view, we can look at this Update General User Information, which will go through and collect information about the users. We'll go ahead and leave that alone, but you can see some of this information has already been gathered. Next, let's take a look in the Monitoring section at the Remote Sessions. As we saw before, this will give us a listing of all the different sessions that are currently connected from a remote location. This is our typical type of desktop connection. At this point, we can disconnect session, log off session, reset virtual machine, and send a message to that particular user. Under local sessions, we see very similar information. But for local sessions, we get a few different options. We can look at the details, which shows us time and dates for different events within this desktop. We can also see where it was checked out to, and information about the virtual machine itself. We can also choose to roll back or initiate replication. From a pool's perspective, we can look at any specific pool and use the Sessions tab to look at any sessions that have been created within that particular pool. So that's how you would monitor your user sessions. I covered some of the options a little bit more in detail in the lesson where we discussed managing the user sessions. When monitoring View, some important resources to keep on hand are the View Administration Guide that talks about these options in a lot more detail, and the View Installation Guide, which can help guide you through the installation and configuration of the events database. Let's wrap up with a quick review. We started off talking about the event database, which stores event information that happens within our View infrastructure and allows us to be able to view these events within the View Administration Console or historically report on events using SQL reporting tools. Then we talked about the System Health Dashboard, which is that section on the top left corner of the View Administrator console that displays quick information about the number of desktops and services within our View infrastructure that are in different states. Those numbers include a link to view more information about that particular component or state. Then we talked about the View Administrator Dashboard, which provides a little bit more detail on the entire health of the entire View system and all of its components the current status of desktops, and a listing of all the utilized data stores. We talked about the different states that a desktop can be in, and the different states that a user session can be in. And then we did some walkthroughs on how you would monitor your View infrastructure and what these different components look like. So that wraps up this lesson. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you in the next lesson.